Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with me through that break. If you are just tuning in, we just finished breaking down everything that led up to the Sweet 16. In this segment coming up, we're transitioning into the NFL. They passed some new rules today. Two new rules were passed, a couple more were voted on. There's a lot more coming out of the NFL right now. The owners' meeting are currently taking place. But before we get too far into that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcspodcast.net. Once again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation. If you leave a message, it'll pop up on the bottom of the screen there for you, me, everybody else to see. We'll have a little discussion about what you had to say. We appreciate anything that you do leave. Once again, that link to leave a tip or donation is gsmcpodcast.net. Like I was saying, new rules in the NFL dropped today. Two new rules, a couple more were voted on. I want to talk about those as well. But before we get into that, the rules that passed. The more controversial one is the hip drop tackle. And it's not controversial in the fact that people are saying it isn't that they don't understand the reason. The hip drop tackle, for those who are unaware, the hip drop tackle is when you are behind a guy, you grab them by their hips, and then you drop your entire body weight to the ground. More or less. There's a whole bunch of other rules, but this rule would make it a penalty to do that. The NFL says it is, dangerous for players. 20%, 20 times more likely, or 20% more likely to get hurt on a play like that than a normal tackle. But the issue comes in not against player safety, because the NFLPA was actually against this rule. They did not want this passed. The issue comes in where you're giving more power to the officials. The officials now have the ability to, much like the pass interference thing that everyone was going over recently, you should be able to review pass interference, all these judgment calls. These they're adding more judgment calls to the league, in a league that needs less of it. And I understand it's for player safety and all that, but sometimes you just have to make that tackle. You don't ever have to do helmet to helmet. That's not something that ever has to be done. But if you have someone by the waist and they're dragging you, I mean, how else are you supposed to tackle? You're supposed to let go and grab their feet? It's a lot harder to tackle that way. And players are against it because, again, this is the judgment call. There are plenty of instances that I'm sure you can imagine where refs are looking at a big play, guy breaks away down the sideline, safety catches up to him, dives, tackles him in what maybe could be considered a hip drop tackle. If you go and watch some highlights or compilations of what people are calling hip drop tackles, some of them are egregious. There's ones where they grab them and then they just sit down on their butt. They take out their legs and everything, and that's dangerous. And it leads to injuries. There's been some major injuries in recent seasons with this play specifically. But it also, when you're looking at those compilations, there's just people diving and happening to grab their waist. At a certain point, it's not a hip drop tackle. And there's going to be so many of these that could really negatively impact the game. We have so many people already complaining about the refs, and there's no reason to give them another whistle. It's all about player safety. It's all about player safety. And normally I'd be on board with this as well. Normally I would. But when the players themselves are out here saying, no, we don't need this to be a rule. Don't pass this. And then the NFL not only passes this, but unanimously passes it. It's a completely different story. I always tend to side with the players because they're the ones playing. They're the ones that know what they want to happen. They're the ones that are most affected by these rules. And if they say that they don't want this rule, then don't put this rule in. I think the players should be able to veto rules. New rules that get put in. I think every team has a team representative. I think if, 2/3 of them decide, or if all of them, I guess it probably would have to be unanimous. I think if all of them decide, hey, we want this to not be a rule, it has to be done that season. They can't go back in the rule book and get rid of it. But if new rules are getting voted on, I think players should be able to have a say in it. And I know they put out saying that they didn't want it, and then it just doesn't matter. That's something that's never going to happen, though. But I don't know. It's not a major change, but it could be a major change. It's one of those rules that I'm sure, like, it doesn't even take that much to picture it. Just a big game, someone makes a controversial call based on this rule. I can see it happening really, really, really close into this season. But the other rule that got passed is something that I'm much more in support of. In the NFL, you only get 2 challenges. In recent years, they've extended it so that if you get both of those challenges right, you can get one more challenge, a third coach's challenge. What they've done now is you just need to get one of those right to get a third coach's challenge. Again, not going to be that big a deal. I'm all for coaches' challenges. I love coaches' challenges. They come with that risk-reward. They don't get used all that often. But it kind of is a vote of confidence when your coach challenges something for you. And now you get more of that. Obviously, you have to get one right. You can't just be throwing out challenges left and right willy-nilly, because there is a consequence. You don't want to get that timeout taken away. But I'm a big fan of this rule. I mean, like I said, this one isn't going to matter that much. That hip drop, neither of these rules, I don't think, are going to affect it too much. But if out of those 2 rules, I think the hip drop tackle is one that I expect to really to have a major impact in at least one game next season. I do believe that is a rule that will change the outcome of one game, make a loss into a win into a loss for some team. And that's what I'm not a fan of. That's what I really don't like. I know it's necessary to player safety. Again, all about player safety here. But the players are against it, so there's no reason to make this rule. Who knows? Maybe 10 years from now, I'll be singing a different tune. But right now, I just think it's a little unnecessary. But there were a couple other rules that were proposed. And the most interesting one to me is the new kickoff proposal. It kind of mirrors that XFL kickoff, which also kicks off this, or the former XFL kickoff. The UFL is not doing that. The UFL does actually kick off this week on Saturday, I believe. So, very excited for that, actually. Spring football is back. It's, woo! But the new kickoff rule is something that really excites me. It's not quite the XFL kickoff, but you're going to line them up like they did in the XFL, 5 yards apart from each other. No one can move until the ball either lands or is caught by the receiving team. And the goal of this kickoff, and what I really like about this, is it's helping cut down on those massive hard collisions where you're getting 30, 40 yards of steam getting at you and then you're running into someone. But it's bringing back kickoff returns. Kickoff returns don't happen all that much. But this one would incentivize kickoff returns because the touchback out of the end zone would be penalized more. I believe the rule has it taking it out to the 35-yard line instead of the 25. So they're trying to get you to kick it in the field of play so that a return happens. And if a return doesn't happen and it goes into touchback after hitting before the end zone, then it's going to be the 20-yard line, I believe, for that touchback. So they're really trying to get that kind of get the kick return back in the game while keeping it safe. And I'm a big fan of that. The one thing where it kind of has downsides is the onside kick. Because you can't do surprise onside kicks anymore. You have to be in that certain formation. You'd only be allowed to do onside kicks in the fourth quarter, and you'd only be allowed to do onside kicks when you're losing in the fourth quarter. But again, something that I think could change that, you give them a 4th and 15, 4th and 20. I don't know. Something that you think would be fair. I'm a big proponent of that. The onside kicks happen at less than 2% clip since the rules changed. and you can't have uneven formations, although you could have those uneven formations again in the onside kick with this new proposal. But those 4th and 15s are just as, impossible to get. The 4th and 15s, I feel like the odds of that, of converting 4th and 15. Let's find out. No, they're not going to tell us. Anyway. Here we go. 4th and 15, you have... In NFL history, it's a 20% conversion rate. If you go to 15 plus, it's 13% conversion rate, which, it doesn't happen that often, but it lets you... It allows you to add more excitement into the game. The onside kick is a fun play, but it's not something that, can... It's not something that really is successful. It's so unsuccessful that it's basically not applicable anymore. I mean, they'd have to make some more rules for this. The 4th and 15, the 20% was not what I was expecting. I was expecting it to be more around 10%, which is, I feel like, kind of a good clip for these last-second efforts. Converting, it's 4th and 15 is not easy. Don't get me wrong. But I would be very excited. I'm a big fan of that kickoff rule. I hope that it gets voted on. The Giants owner said they were hoping on another vote there, trying to force another vote tonight. We'll see what ends up happening. But a lot of new stuff going around in the NFL. Let me know what you guys think of these new rules. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The hip drop tackle, I understand the reason, but if the players are against that rule, I'm against that rule. And the challenge is just, it happens. But I'd really like to see that kickoff rule. I really would. Anyway, in our next segment, we're going to talk a little bit about the Titans. The Titans have had a really interesting offseason. They most recently brought in L'Jarius Sneed over the weekend from the Chiefs for a 3rd and a 7th round pick. The Titans don't look now. The Titans might rebuild in 1 year. That's probably an overreaction, but we'll get into all of that in just a little bit. Stick around through this break. We'll break down the Titans. Baseball coming up next. Shohei Ohtani press conference is happening in just about 15 minutes. So we'll try and get as many bits and pieces from that into our show as we possibly can. But thank you, everybody. We'll be right back on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.